All right, members, so we have attained the quorum and now call the meeting to order. Item number 1, information papers issued since the last meeting. The Secretariat has not received any papers since the last meeting. Item 2, proposal to set up a joint subcommittee under this panel and the development panel to follow up on issues relating to the redevelopment, maintenance, and management of aged buildings. This is proposed by Mr. Edward Lau. He sent in a letter, but Mr. Lau is not here in this chamber. Mr. Tommy Chung, Chairman. At the development panel, Mr. Lau raised a similar thing. In the letter, he has set out the terms of reference, and it was endorsed by the development panel. That's the terms of reference and the proposed scope of work. This is just for members' information. If this is agreeable to this panel, we can then join the queue. We will have spot number 8, and we have to await endorsement. All right, members. Mr. Lau is not here in this chamber. Do you have any questions? Or is this agreeable to members? This proposal is set for a joint committee. Comments, please. Objection? If not, then if you don't have any comments, let's so decide to proceed in order to save a bit of time. And this is 8th on the waiting list. On to item 3, latest progress of youth development work. There are 2 papers. Shall we invite the administration in, please? There are 2 papers, CB2 1877/16-17/01 and also CB2 1877/16-17/02. That's background brief prepared by the LegCo Secretariat. Members might wish to get ready for putting questions. With us for this item are Mr. Lau Kwok-fan, Secretary for Home Affairs, Mr. Patrick Lee, Deputy Secretary, and Mr. Vincent Fong, Principal Assistant Secretary. Just like to invite the Secretary to brief us on the paper, please.
Chairman, the government places high emphasis on youth development. In recent years, we rolled out a number of new measures in order to promote multifaceted excellence and provide opportunities of learning, training, and personal development to young people with different aspirations and talents. We also hope that young people in Hong Kong would have a vision in our country and the world. And in the face of opportunities, they should understand their rights and understand their obligations, as well as build positive values to life. In the face of globalization, we have been trying hard to build platforms to broaden the horizons of our young people and broaden or enrich their experience. And in the 2017 to 18 budget, $100 million was set aside by the Chief Executive for youth development. At the end of June, we rolled out the International Youth Exchange Program. We will continue with the Belt and Road funding scheme, and in order to facilitate exchanges between our young people and those along the Belt and Road countries. We also want to promote a culture of multifaceted excellence so that our young people can exercise their talents and build positive values. That's why we rolled out the funding scheme for youth life planning activities so that schools can work together in implementing different activities. We also rolled out the multifaceted excellence scholarship in order to reward students with excellence performance in culture and sport. We also set out a $300 million fund, and we also launched a funding scheme on life education for young people. The Home Affairs Bureau and Commission on Youth have launched a public engagement on youth development policy, inviting young people and other stakeholders to contemplate the future direction of youth development. The new term SAR government is considering setting up a Youth Development Commission chaired by the Chief Secretary to steer the relevant bureaus and departments to take forward youth development initiatives. The COI will be incorporated into the new commission. In the future, the HAB and COI would continue to establish youth development policy and work with various NGOs to take forward youth development initiatives. I welcome questions from members on this paper. Does any member wish to speak? On the list we have Mr. Jimmy Ng, Mr. Yu Si-wing, myself, Mr. Xiu Ka-chun. Anyone else? If not, 4 minutes each, including question and answer. Mr. Jimmy Ng. Thank you. In paragraph 13 of the paper, the government will launch a public engagement on youth development, and 7 areas have been drawn up, including volunteer work, healthcare, community engagement, etc. Youth development is very diverse, and there are many different areas involved. Will the government discuss other areas, for example, housing, constitutional affairs, etc.? The paper also mentioned the setting up of a youth development commission to be chaired by the Chief Secretary, and I strongly support this idea. And we hope that members who want to do something for our young people would join. Would the government define a specific age sector, for example, under 35, under 45, or under 55? Mr. Ng is very right in that our young people are interested in different aspects, including housing and constitutional affairs. If they want to voice their views, they might not be able to do so through the HAB. That is why the Chief Secretary would set up a Youth Development Commission by involving different bureaus. After the setting up of this commission, I believe the different bureaus will discuss some areas of interest for young people, and hopefully this can help foster their talents. So that is the context of the Youth Development Commission. The Commission on Youth already launched a public engagement on youth development policy, and we have shared a pamphlet with you outlining our youth development work in the past years. This is the basis of our work, and we have consulted young people on our work. After the work is complete, we will compile a report to be submitted to the Chief Secretary. By that time, the Chief Secretary would launch youth development work based on the materials available. So we will take it step by step. And we also place high emphasis on youth members because we believe that young people should speak out for fellow young people. So on top of representatives from different departments, we should involve more young members. Would you set a target on the number of members under 35 or 45? Would you have such targets? This is not just about increasing the number of youth members at the Youth Development Commission. And we have various consultative frameworks available within the government to enhance youth membership. So they have plenty of channels to voice their views. Mr. Yu Si-wing, thank you. In terms of learning, exchange, subsidy or entrepreneurship, these have to do with young people. A lot of young people, especially university graduates, might feel lost after they graduate because they might not be able to find work easily. A lot of companies do not want to hire inexperienced graduates. So sometimes they could not find work in their areas of expertise, or they would have to wait. But the longer they wait, they will start to forget what they've learned. For YWETS, the government used to provide subsidy to companies to hire graduates. And the initiative had been effective because you provided incentive for companies to hire these graduates. For Ivy or other higher education institute graduates, the graduates could not transition to a bachelor's program, and with more and more of these graduates, are you going to offer more employment support to them, just like under YWETS? And after a period of internship, the graduates can find employment in other companies and they will enjoy more opportunities. Have you considered that? Secretary. Chairman, I agree with Mr. Yu. If a student can receive an internship, this would certainly help with his job finding in the future. So we are conducting two areas of work. First, career planning. In secondary school, we hope that students can receive internships at different companies, or better, they would be assigned mentors. And this would help them find employment in the future. And we have also introduced internship programs in the mainland and abroad, and the results have been positive. Hong Kong has a population of 7 million, but a lot of our companies actually face the world or the mainland. Students who have received internship either in Hong Kong or elsewhere would certainly benefit. After receiving internships, most students would include that experience on their CVs. For example, I met a lawyer this year. The lawyer took part in our internship program, and he made it clear that he wanted to learn more about mainland laws, and he chose to work in a law firm in Shenzhen. So this would certainly serve him well in the future. The Secretary did not address my question. He talked about secondary schools and overseas or mainland exchanges. I'm talking about the plight of university or tertiary graduates. Will you encourage companies to hire graduates? Please be brief. The HAB have no relevant measures, but I understand that the Labor and Welfare Bureau is doing work on this, so we can compile information and get back to you later. This paper is about youth development work, and there are only 4 pages. I think it's way too brief. As I understand, there are many aspects to youth development. Every year, we are sponsoring Hong Kong Federation of Youth Groups and other uniformed groups, and we have invested substantial resources. And this paper only shows the measures directly related to the Home Affairs Bureau. But when you talk about youth development, you must cover different areas, including the funds received by other youth groups. Why weren't those youth groups mentioned in this paper? So what is the government's stance on these youth groups? And I'm a bit surprised they weren't mentioned. As for the high-level commission to be chaired by the Chief Secretary, what will be the difference between this new commission with the existing commission on youth? Are there any differences in their objectives? Secretary? Chairman? We mentioned the latest update of our youth development policy, and information was available in recent policy addresses and budgets, so if you want, we can provide them in detail. You talked about the HKFYG, and their presence might be reflected in another bureau. The chairman and Mr. Ng raised a question. The interests or concerns of our young people cannot be covered by a single bureau. That's why we need to set up a youth development commission.
Well, the second question is the COY and the Youth Development Commission and the Division of Work in Future. Under the Bureau, we have the Commission on Youth dealing with youth development work. Different bureaus are doing the same, although they have their own remits. So this administration is proposing a new direction by setting up the Youth Development Commission. It is an upgraded commission chaired by the CS. Different bureaus will be knocking their heads together to cover holistic development directions. So it is not one single commission. It is answerable to the whole administration. That's the major difference. Now, for the first part, you like young people to face different challenges and to have global outlook, face various opportunities and challenges, and so on. Now, this is not something undertaken by the HAB. It is the whole government, isn't it? Chairman, we haven't got the policy objective of the Youth Development Commission yet. This is the work being undertaken by the Bureau at the moment, and this is our vision going forward. As regards the Youth Development Commission, the COY is currently undertaking a consultation, and the work will be handed over to the new commission to take things forward. Mr. Su Ka-chun, Chairman, I share your observation that this progress report is rather vague and insubstantial. It is really highlighting all the positive things. Now, Mr. Jiming asked a question about the age bracket. The Bureau seems to be evading the question. I know that this is a difficult question. There may be different definitions regarding adults. The probate and childbearing and marriage, I mean, there may be different age thresholds. When you deal with youth development, I don't think you can evade this particular question. I've got two questions here. First, on page 3, fostering multifaceted excellence. In 2018-19, the scholarship will be increased from 20 to 40. It may sound as if the number has been doubled, but the number is still 40. This is about multifaceted excellence. And you may end up with excellent people, but they may not be multifaceted. I found this on the web. I'm not sure whether this is an excellent piece, in your opinion. This is the 22nd century rhapsody of railway lines. This is a creation by the student. He spent a whole year designing the whole thing. I don't know him at all. This is not giving him a plug. Now, he is a railway aficionado. He spent a whole year to come up with this rhapsody version of railway lines. Is this a multifaceted excellence? Would you, in the context of the scholarship, award the scholarship to him? Or are you saying that this is not something that can be translated into something valuable, and therefore this will be cast aside? Second, about the Youth Development Commission. Secretary Lau, you must be aware that in the 1990s, we had 5 districts in which we had the youth councils. In 94, 95, 96, I was in charge of the youth councils in Chunwan, but in absence of government subsidies and support, all of them have fallen by the wayside. If you want to create a youth development commission, I am wondering whether you should revive the youth councils all of Hong Kong. You should have a territory-wide youth council for young people to be engaging in debates over youth affairs. That would be more practical, isn't it? Secretary? On the first question, Mr. Xiu produced this diagram. On Saturday, the Arts Development Council has a campus ambassador program, and on Saturday I visited the secondary school exhibition, and I saw a diagram very similar to the one you showed us. There were 1,000 schools taking part, and they produced really wonderful pieces, a lot of creative arts and literary productions. We're going to encourage this more in future. This scholarship is not confined to academic excellence. In terms of art sports and social services, they have to show excellence and they have to be recommended by the principals. And they may not achieve the highest academic performance. If they're taken on by the colleges, we are going to give them 4 to 6 years of full subsidies. And Mr. Xiu mentioned these kind of creative productions. If someone has potentials in these areas, including sports, we will give them full support. And this will produce pretty good results. The second thing is the district affairs. As regards how the CS would take this forward at the district level, we will find out at the next stage. But at the district level, we have in the 18 districts a youth network system, and they are organizing a whole raft of different activities. As the next step, I will leave it to the CS. Dr. Fernando Zhang, Chairman. We're talking about youth development. How much room is there for youth development in Hong Kong these days? I'd like to put this to the officials. I'm not sure you have any children. The one in the middle is or looks younger. Maybe he's not at that age group yet. If you've got children educated overseas and they're not coming back to Hong Kong for a whole variety of reasons, now you have a lot of opportunities and you have your own network. Would you feel bad about them not coming back to Hong Kong? Last year, the Civic Exchange published the well-being index 26 in Hong Kong. For those 18 and 19 years old, 84% are worried about poverty. And 60% of them are worried about not being able to afford the family expenses. 60% of them feel like emigrating out of Hong Kong. I'm not sure why Hong Kong has descended into a situation where young people are so frustrated. If you look at the economic structure, it is very much unitary, and we're leaning towards the mainland. The wages are at a lower level for the young people. The three main issues are housing, followed by education. The majority of the young people would like to be educated overseas. And the third is the quality of the government. This is not me saying it, and these are the findings of the Civic Exchange survey. You presented us with these few pages, and you're just going through the motion, and you will be creating this Youth Development Commission headed up by the CS. And the question is, society is under more and more pressure, and Mr. Nathan Law is a young lad. He's got everything going for him, and what treatment does he get? For the professionals, for the grassroots people, they may not be able to achieve excellence academically. What room is there for them in Hong Kong? Politically, culturally, or even in terms of freedom of speech, the development of civic society, we are, the government is clamping down on all of these, and the media are being clamped down upon. Politically, we're clamped down upon. What room is there for young people? Mr. Lau, Secretary Lau, how do you feel these kind of atmospherics in Hong Kong these days? And you just saying what you said without any knowledge about all of these. There is a disconnect between you and the young people. How would you react to what I say? Secretary? in my bureau in developing youth work, whether the young people are at secondary school years or university years, this paper is making preparation for them. This is providing them with a platform for them to develop their potential. This is precisely what we're doing. Mr. Raymond Chen, I'd like to ask a question about the Belt funding scheme for exchange in Belt and Road countries. And some said that some of the tours are more like travel tours, and this is more like letting political parties building their support. There was $270,000 for 8 days visit to Russia. The tour fee is $3,000, and there are different points being visited. And some said that this is not achieving the purpose of civic education. Now, for these exchange tours, what criteria do you have to assess whether they measure up to the bar? I mean, some of them are organized together with the Committee on Promotion of Civic Education. Let's say they are coming to Hong Kong and they visited the LegCo and so on. Would they be able to measure up to the criteria? And also the IYEP, the number of local participants is rather low. You said that this is two-way, and you need the coordination of the other jurisdictions. Now, for this Belt and Road scheme, this is outsourced, and the number of young people who benefit from this is pretty high. Now, for the IYEP, International Youth Exchange Program, will this be not be organized by the COI and let other people make the application? Secretary. Now, the Belt and Road initiative, it started last year. The response was pretty good. Like Mr. Chen said, if they organize this as a tour, a sightseeing tour, they will not be able to measure up to the requirements, and they have to specify the units that they are visiting and the specific items that they will be able to get the sponsorship. Let's say last year the PolyU Design College, they applied for a visit to Israel, and I know the LegCo members are also visiting Israel. And when they made the application, they made it very clear that they are visiting the Arts Museum College.
And they would meet the mayor, etc. That's why we approved the visit, and the response has been positive. This year, the School of Education from PolyU has seen their application granted as well. They will have meetings with or sessions with the mayor. So I'm sure they would benefit in terms of sharing knowledge among the Belt and Road countries. Well, it's easy enough to arrange a visit to LegCo, so to speak, but how can you make sure that the tours are related to the theme? For such tours, they are very diverse in nature. You cannot say that they have to do specific things for them to be valid visits. We have dozens of projects, and they have visited different countries for different forms of exchange, and we want to encourage that. We want to encourage our young people to see more. Mr. Roy Kwong. Chairman, today we are discussing youth development policy. Of course, I have my expectations. And this is not just about the Commission on Youth. the new term government should do more for our youth, especially on realizing their dreams. This past weekend, I attended the ceremony of a writing competition, and the winner will have their works published in a book. And South Korea is doing very well in terms of its soft power, in terms of art and culture, literature, and these are certainly signature of a city. And South Korea's creative industries are very strong, and a lot of young people are involved. We hope that the HAB would do something in our cultural policy and in realizing the dreams for its young people. Nowadays, a lot of people, including young people, are struggling to survive in industrial buildings, and they are trying to create works inside those buildings. But Hong Kong is very different from Taiwan. Taiwan has the conditions in place to foster creativity for their young people. And that's why they came up with Taiwanese songs, Taiwanese writing, and Taiwanese creations. But in Hong Kong, the HAB is the main facilitator. If the HAB is not committed, it would be things would be very difficult. Hong Kong does not have a youth policy, but if the HAB want to do something good for the people and encourage young people to chase their dreams, certainly there are things you can do. Can you share with us your plans for the future, Secretary? I agree with Mr. Kwok in that our young people are very interested in culture and sports. In terms of cultural creativity, as I said in a recent internal meeting, I hope that the cultural sector can invest more resources into schools in order to nurture future creators and performers. This past weekend, I attended an event organized by the Art Development Council and by 100 different schools. And the LCSD also works with different schools. So if we can do a better job in audience building for our future West Kowloon Cultural District and the East Kowloon Cultural Center, I think we must begin our work ahead of time. What about the young people and artists in industrial buildings? Is there something you can do? I trust that different government departments are working on this. Any other questions? If not, I will conclude the discussion of this item. Item number 4, review of hotel and guest house accommodation ordinance. And with us we have Mr. Lau, Secretary for Home Affairs, and Mr. Jack Chen, Director of Home Affairs, Acting, and Ms. Vega Wong, Assistant Director from DHAD. Can the Secretary walk us through the paper, please? In order to enhance the hotel and guest house accommodation ordinance and crack down on unauthorized guest houses, in 2015, we reported the outcome of the review to members, as well as our administrative enhancement measures. Members generally supported our proposals. We have been working with the Department of Justice on the drafting of the Hotel and Guest House Accommodation Amendment Bill, and we implemented a series of administrative enhancement measures from 2015. In light of experience and feedback from the trade and stakeholders, we have introduced further refinements. In terms of the legislative proposal, we propose that in future issuing and renewal of license, we will consider whether there's any express restrictive covenances, and we realize that there's a lack of DMC in some buildings, and in order to allow these buildings to operate hotels and guest houses, in the absence of a DMC, we have to consider whether there are explicit restrictive provisions, and an endorsement is required. And in the issuing or renewal of license, the views of residents must be considered. We will set up an administrative independent panel to collect views from residents and make recommendations. Since hotels and guest houses can be located in different premises, we recommend that we have to go through administrative consultation. And in terms of the administrative enhancement measures, we introduced 3 measures at the end of 2015, and that is requiring third-party risk insurance and 2 different types of licenses, and 3, a 24-hour man count is required to be set up in order to enhance the overall safety and management. And after the grace period of 12 months, licensees generally complied with the above measures. And with the increasing demand for homestay lodging in recent years, we realize that some owners are renting out their properties as homestay lodgings. We intend to draw up a new set of guidelines on applications for guest house, and in terms of building safety, well, without compromising building safety or fire safety, we hope to streamline the licensing requirements. Our latest recommendation has considered the views of different stakeholders with a view to striking a balance. We hope that members can support our latest proposal, and comments are welcome. Thank you. Any questions from members? Ms. Eddie Xu. There won't be any time restriction. For buildings in the new territories, for the anti-exempted houses, I think they are more likely to be used as homestay lodgings for Big Wave Bay West. There are a number of licensed houses and registered squatter huts. They are similar as the holiday flats in Sai Kung. I understand that there are dozens of thousands of such licensed houses or registered squatters. They might be used to keep poultry and pigs, and many of them have been abandoned. They are located in rural areas, and they might be attached to organic farms. Some of these houses might be converted into homestay lodging, and members of the Hon LAU Kwok also made similar requests. Apart from small houses or old house lots and the village type houses, which could be used as homestay lodging and licensed for certain areas. For example, remote rural areas, new small houses cannot be developed. But for existing licensed houses or registered squatters, under certain arrangements, would they be allowed to be converted into homestay lodging? Have you considered the possibility? Secretary, this is actually very similar to what we have in mind. When we discussed the matter with Hon LAU Kwok, we asked whether there's a concrete example we can look at. And they proposed Lai Chi Wo at that time. And I think Mr. Chu is very familiar with Lai Chi Wo. It's a sizable old village which has been abandoned. So we have looked at the site and we feel that there's potential to be converted into homestay lodging. We are the licensing authority, and these sites must fulfill the relevant lands and fire safety ordinances. And when those conditions are met, we are happy to issue a guest house homestay lodging license. We will publish guidelines in the future, and owners can rent out their apartments in urban areas as well. It doesn't have to be a village type house. In the gist, we hope to streamline the application procedures so that homestay lodging can be developed in a healthy and legal manner. The situation in the rural areas of the new territories and the urban areas are very different. In the urban areas, even though there might be fluctuations in the number of tourists in recent years, tourists are staying in places which used to be residential units, so there is competition. Some units could have been rented out to Hong Kong people, but once you relax the rules in urban areas, you will introduce extra competition. If I can make more money renting out my flat via Airbnb, maybe that's what I will choose. If you relax the rules in urban areas, in terms of the supply of residential units, have you considered whether you will introduce extra competition which would lead to an even tighter supply of residential units?
I may agree with Lai Chi Wo and rural areas for relaxation. Not a lot of people want to live in Lai Chi Wo, but in the abandoned villages, if you turn them into tourism purposes, I would agree. But in the urban areas, if you do this, then it would cause competition. So in urban areas, if you want to relax the criteria for homestay lodging purposes, I detect some contradiction there. Secretary. Under the HAGAO, we regulate the hotels and guest houses and holiday camps, holiday flats, and we also have regulation of the homestay lodgings. It would be hard for us to make a distinction between urban and rural areas. Now, for people to convert their places into homestay lodging, they have to fulfill the HAGAO and they have to consult the residents nearby. They have to fulfill the DMC, the land lease, the fire service regulation. It's not as if they can do it when they want to do it. They have to fulfill all the regulations. It's my turn to pick questions. I've got 2 questions here. Para 8 about consultation. There is the statutory consultation. That's the TPB. That's easy to understand. B, if no statutory consultation is conducted, there should be an administrative consultation. You have A and B for consultation. If it is part of a building, you have to consult the owners, residents, and business operators. If they take up the whole building, then they have to consult affected people in the vicinity. How do you consider the feedback in the consultation, and who will be deciding on the outcome? Is it for the authority, or do you have a mechanism, a committee to make the decision, and what criteria will be adopted to in making the decision? My second question, this is a very specific question, and that's para 16. As of 31st of May 2017, you've issued more than 130 guest house holiday flat licenses to NT-exempted houses. Now you have village houses that are providing this service, and what proportion does this number represent in the overall scheme of things? I defer to my colleague for the second question. Now, the first question, this is how it will operate after the consultation. We hope that there will be a consultative committee composed of people from different quarters, and they will assess the feedback from their respective perspectives, and they will make recommendation to the administration. The HAB will have the final decision. This licensing authority will look at different sources of opinions, and they also have regard to the precedents. Let's say they have the amusement game center experience, and they also look at the feedback from the nearby residents, and there are different stakeholders who would contribute their views as well. I defer to my colleague for the second question. Mr. Chen, we do have a set of guidelines for the NT-exempted houses to fulfill the requirements when they're seeking to get the license for guest house license. Now, this is somewhat lower in terms of requirements, but they have to fulfill the fire safety and building requirements. The number is 130 at the moment. We don't have the overall number all over Hong Kong, but each case of application, we deal with them seriously. And we did have success stories in which they managed to get a license. Why doesn't the government have any assessment of the numbers of these guest houses that are providing services in Hong Kong? I'm sure you must have some ideas. Don't you have any figures? No ballpark figures? Mr. Chen, Chairman, the basic requirement is that as long as they are allowed in the land lease or DMC, they can apply for a guest house license as long as they fulfill fire and building requirements. As to the overall numbers, we will try to identify the numbers, and basically they are in the anti-exempted houses. So the number can be as many as 100,000. Well, I don't think all of them will be making the application. Yes, of course, some people are residing in them. We can supplement in the number after the meeting. How many of them are providing these kind of service without getting a license? If they don't get a license, Chairman, we don't have the number. Let me put this to members. How many would like to put questions? I have Mr. Yu Si-wing for the first round, Mr. Kwok-fan, and Mr. Hon LAU Kwok-fan. That's for the first round. Mr. Kenneth Lau, 4 in the first round, and the second round, Mr. Eddie Chu. I have to apply the 4-minute rule. Mr. Yu Si-wing, 4 minutes, please, for the Q&A. I've read the information 2014 to 16. The number of inspections, 13,000. That's inspection of the unsuspected unlicensed guest houses. If you look at Airbnb's development over the past year and a half, the unlicensed guest houses, the number has shot up by 68% to 6,400 or so. And this is an undesirable situation. We've seen a larger supply of these unlicensed guest houses, but the number of inspections has not correspondingly increased. Is the government adopting a passive attitude towards unlicensed guest houses or the Airbnb premises? So is this the policy in future? In 2017-18, you have 132 people in the team. There hasn't been any increase compared with this year. So should you conduct a review there? Mr. Chen, thanks very much, Mr. Yu, for the question. The provision of guest houses, in particular through the web, we attach a lot of importance to this. We have a specific team that browses the websites that advertising guest houses and hotels in Hong Kong in order to identify some intelligence to tackle the unlicensed guest houses. But the prosecution figures are not satisfactory. Now, for the Airbnb guest houses, we only have single-digit prosecution figure. With the mode of operation, it would be hard to instigate prosecution because under the law, we do need to have very stringent requirements. We have to catch them red-handed, like they're caught exchanging money and the keys and so on. With the web-based hiring, they would make the payment using credit card online. Money would change hand beforehand. When they get the keys, there is no money changing hand. It would be hard for us to instigate any prosecution. It's for this reason they would like to amend the legislation that we can make use of the circumstantial evidence and also impose criminal liability in order to instigate prosecution. Mr. Yu, I appreciate the difficulties involved, but I don't think the government should be too conservative here. Until you have the legislation enacted, I hope that you will step up your inspection. The figures over the past 3 years seem to be rather conservative on the part of the administration. Would you consider my suggestion? Mr. Chen, indeed, we have been stepping up our work. We do get in touch with the Airbnb. We've had a number of meetings with them. If they want to run a guest house in Hong Kong, they have to get a license, or else they would bear criminal liabilities. And we do mount decoy operations, and they have produced some effects. We will do more of the same going forward. Mr. Hsu Kwok-fan, Chairman. Now, in this paper, I'd like to say that over the past years or so, I've been liaising with your bureau regarding the hotel and guest houses. The association has been asking me for assistance, and I'm grateful to the bureau, in particular Madam Wong. We've had a number of meetings together, and the guest house associations expressed concerns about the 24-hour counter service and inspection, and they have that while they fulfill the legislative requirements, you have to make it business friendly, and they have observed the government's requirements, and the administration has made some adjustments in a way that they can survive. They can make it viable. Now, the retail business has dipped, and the guest houses are doing really worse than before. If the tourism is picking up, then I'm sure that the guest houses would be able to provide the accommodation. I'm talking about the licensed guest houses, of course. I don't think I can help the unlicensed ones. In this paper, if the administration has some new ideas, or if we can invite deputations, it would be a good idea. Like last time I told the administration that the sector was in support of the administration. It didn't have to take to the street in protest. If you make it reasonable, then I'm sure that the residents or the owners' corporations would not object to their presence. Then it would be a good idea. Now you have some new ideas in the paper. I think it would be a good idea, Mr. Chairman, to invite some deputations. The other thing is about the homestay lodgings. My impression is that we did have some discussion at the council meeting, shared economy. The shared economy sounds really wonderful, but how can you share the economy? How can you share the resources? Basically, people are making money together. In Hong Kong, Uber, there are some potential problems. They are driving without a higher license. The same can be said about Airbnb. They are running guest houses without a license.
For the consumers, in terms of price and convenience, apparently it's great if you can just hail any car, because it might be hard to get a taxi. But when you think about insurance, licensing, or fire safety, well, this is something you should think about. For guest houses provided by Airbnb, owners' corporations have a lot of concerns because their buildings would be flocked by tourists, and they might leave a lot of trash behind. And there might be smaller guest houses within a single guest house. That's why we have this ordinance. This is a long-standing issue. So for homestay lodging, the government should be very careful, or else you are just asking for more trouble for yourself. Secretary, thank you very much for your reminder. For the licensing regime, we will comply with the latest licensing requirements. This is not easy. You have to comply with the DMC lease conditions, and you have to consult the residents as well. Mr. Kwok-fan, thank you. Whenever we talk about amendments to the HAGAO, the paper would cite the unfortunate fire at Continental Mansion. And there are concerns about the facilities in hotels and guest houses. As for the management of owners' corporations under the HAGAO or the Buildings Ordinance, they are both within the ambit of the HAB. However, the HAB has been contradictory in their work. You ask the Owners Corporation to follow Cap 344 and the DMCs, but at the same time, you're allowing activities prohibited by the DMC to continue. So hopefully you can right your wrongs and carry out proper buildings management. The trade expressed their views. That's why the government came up with the arrangement of a one-time renewal. I think they have tried to strike a balance. But we still have our concerns on the homestay, lodging, and Airbnb. Apparently, the government is very passive. It's hard for them to produce evidence, and this is something we realize. Nonetheless, the public expects the government to come up with a plan. We asked the government to crack down on unauthorized guest houses, but if you allow Airbnb to continue to do business here in an unauthorized manner, then it would defeat our purpose. So you have to come up with a plan as soon as possible. Technologies continue to change, and our strategies need to change as well. Or else the government's reputation will take a hit. So anything in response from the government, Secretary? I agree with Mr. Kwok. You mentioned a few points about guest houses, homestay lodging, or Airbnb, and the relevant problems. At the end, it's all down to effective regulation. If we have effective regulation, the residents will suffer less nuisance. So we hope to implement legislative amendments and that there will be administrative controls. For homestay lodging, we will carry out consultation once everything is done, and when the licensing conditions are met, licensed hotels and guest houses can operate properly. If Airbnb still engages in illegal homestay lodging or guest house operation, they will face consequences. So now we have to define which premises would be licensed and which not. Mr. Hon LAU. Chairman, the paper talked about enhancing the licensing regime. This is something worth supporting. I want to talk about the remote villages. If the enhanced measures would allow lodging at the remote villages, I think the government should invest more resources in promoting traditional heritage so that the walled villages in the new territories can be preserved. For people might not want to visit urban areas because they are too familiar with the surrounding already. But for remote villages, would the government be committed in relaxing the restrictions and investing on infrastructure? For example, in Lai Chi, at least $50 million has been spent on rehabilitating the farmland and repairing the houses. And for Tongbing Chau, it's not very accessible by sea, and there are only 1 or 2 sailings per week. So the government must be committed in investing more resources. So do you have such plans? Secretary. I talked about homestay lodging or remote villages. If villages want to convert their premises into homestay lodging, they can file an application. I agree that we have very beautiful places in the new territories. We hope that Hong Kong citizens or even tourists can enjoy these places and appreciate their beauty. That's why I gave the example of Lai Chi Wo. We made visits to the area, and we found it a very nice place which can be developed into homestay lodging so long as our requirements are met. Of course, this is very different from a guest house. If we are successful with Lai Chi Wo, we might help convert other villages into homestay lodging as well. And in terms of the ancillary facilities, and for Lai Chi Wo, it's accessible from Sha Tin or Sha Tau Kok. But Sha Tau Kok is now a restricted area. The Sha Tau Kok pier is very beautiful. So the key is whether it will be opened. For the Tongbing Chau pier, it's not within our ambit, but in the policy address of the previous chief executive, the use of pier can be considered for guest house or other purposes. So we hope Mr. Lau can bring these ideas to fellow villages. We support this, but in order to have a chance of success, the villages should be proactive. For Lai Chi Wo and Tongbing Chau, well, the villages there have been very active, so hopefully the government would help them. Mr. Edichu, second round. Sorry, Mr. Charles Mok, first round, 4 minutes. Thank you. Apologies for joining the meeting late. There have been discussions about homestay lodging. So I just have a follow-up question. The Secretary talked about homestay lodging and the use of technology in bookings. I agree that effective regulation is important. The question is, how can we regulate properly? It's not just about law enforcement. If we can offer some convenience, then everyone would profit. In some countries, regulations have been updated. Applications for homestay lodging are now open, as the paper suggested. And Airbnb is not the only service provider of its kind, even in Hong Kong. There are many providers, and they are not the only ones who would run into problems. And in paragraph 17, you said that you are exploring with relevant bureaus and departments the idea of drawing up a set of guidelines to cater for license applications for homestay lodging, provided that fire and building safety will not be compromised. For the proposed legislative amendments, would there be time to carry out consultation, or would you carry out the work afterwards? You mentioned, I mentioned that some local companies might operate this type of service in Hong Kong. Have you looked into the situation with them and whether they have any difficulties? I met some of these companies. They also feel that some premises are not appropriate for lodging, and places like village-type houses would be more appropriate. So they might be happy to be regulated. So have you discussed the matter with them? For online booking of guest houses, we have been monitoring the situation, and we have been in close contact with the operators. There is certainly a demand for such guest houses. So effective regulation is very important. We have hotel, guest house, holiday camps, and holiday flat licenses, and hopefully we can have a new category for homestay lodging. The requirements would be less than those of hotels, and 5 host rule would not be required for very small facilities. So we hope to streamline the procedures as much as possible. For licensed premises that comply with all the regulations, whether or not they are open for booking online, everyone would benefit, including owners and consumers. We are undergoing legislative amendment, and we are also updating our guidelines on homestay lodging. This way, the public would know that we are happy to listen. Anyone else for the first round? If not, Mr. Issue, please, second round.
4 minutes for the questions and answers. My question about the rural villages, I don't think the Secretary is with me. You mentioned the fire and the building requirements. I'm saying that in the anti-villages, we have hundreds of thousands of these houses. People used to use them as farm sheds for rearing chickens and pigs. They're not existing in the form of anti-exempted houses. They're sitting on the farm lease, and they run these sheds as registered farm sheds, and they're tolerated by the government. Now, for these structures, the uses are very restrictive, and they're used for the purposes they are intended. If they are pig sheds, they cannot use them for anybody else. But instead of keeping poultry and livestock, the people are residing in them. We're talking about tens of thousands of them in this category. Now, when we are mulling over the idea of homestay lodging for remote areas like LegCo, we may have these kind of structures. Other than the village housing, you have the sheds that were erected a few decades ago. You have to fulfill the fire services requirements, that much we agree, but in terms of land lease, the land use, can there be any flexibility to allow them to run homestay lodging in specific areas? I'd like to broaden the scope. I'm not trying to strangle them at all. Now, that's about the rural areas. Can you allow more flexibility in the land use? In urban areas, I was talking about the quantity. If Airbnb operations are getting more and more popular, I understand that for some new buildings, these are new built premises, they are running Airbnb services there because of the shortage in hotel accommodation. A lot of them are using the new build premises for this purpose. So will your bureau be talking with THB or DEVB that there should be a quota imposed on them? Because the more you're doing this, then you're compromising the policies of the THBs. Secretary? On the first question, the second question is also related. In answer to Mr. Chu's question for the first time, I said that for guest houses and the future homestay lodging, we will have a licensing authority. Whether a license will be issued will depend very much on whether they are on the right side of the law in terms of land lease, like you said, fire, safety, and insurance. If they fall short in these areas, then they don't meet the criteria for licenses. That's beyond dispute. I'm sure Mr. Chu would agree that if the land lease has a restrictive provision that there should be no habitation of human beings. What, Chairman, if under the registered requirements, the habitation would be allowed, what's going to happen? Well, I think I've gone beyond my remit. This has gone into land areas. It would depend on the case. What I'm saying is if they fulfill all the legislative requirements, then that would meet the criteria for licensing. All right, Mr. Edward Lau, for the first round, I go along with the Secretary that in terms of land lease or in terms of legislation, those that do not fulfill the requirements should not be allowed as homestay lodging. Squatters cannot be transferred or temporary housing. If somebody is renting out the squatter huts, then that would present problems. In the NT, indeed, there are village houses that are legit, and there is room for homestay lodging to be provided, and they can promote tourism. In Lai Chi Wo, some pilot schemes are being trialed. Cat O is another potential area. It is very quiet. It is very nice area because of the remoteness. Many of the houses have collapsed or fallen into a state of disrepair. I'm sure that people who have emigrated or people who have moved out will be can be given the incentive to rebuild the houses. Now, my question is this: for the licensed guest houses, it is said that there should be 24-hour counter service, but they can have alternative plans. And what sort of alternatives are you talking about? And under what circumstances would you allow alternatives to the 24-hour manned counters? Like I said, cattle is rather remote, and they can have premises like Airbnb. When you turn up, you get given a key, and you don't need to have any concierge kind of service. In these village houses, they can run the homestay lodging in that way. Mr. Lau. Thanks very much, Mr. Lau, for the question. We appreciate the situation. So earlier we published a supplementary set of guidelines for the guest houses. If they cannot provide a 24-hour manned counter because of the physical constraint, maybe we allow them to have some alternatives, and they include well, we have to make sure that the premises are run safely. We allow them to have a designated hotline for the lodges to notify the managers, and within a short period of time, the lodges' requests can be responded to. We also allow them to have 24-hour surveillance cameras. Now, these alternatives would be acceptable to us for the village-type housing. We've also put in place some alternatives like direct telephone line or some technology assistance. Mr. Lau, in the village houses, maybe they have managers nearby. There should be no problems. For homestay lodging, it's not simply about accommodation. You have to have the F&B. Do you have any one-stop service for them? Well, one-stop service, and if they run homestay lodging, they will be running the service. You talked about food and beverage, that would come under another license. I'm saying that can they enjoy the exemption in terms of F&B also? In the NT, you may have the rural characteristics, and you should have a one-stop service. Well, I think you have to have some specific examples. We're not exempting anything at all. We are following the legislation. We'd like to have some guidelines to put things clear. Mr. Lau, accommodation is okay, but they are producing food, and they have to apply for food licenses. And are you going to assist them in these procedures as well? Well, make it simple, please. Yes, we're following the legislative provisions. Mr. Yu Siwing, second round. Homestay lodging. I am uncertain about the definition. The paper is sufficiently clear. Guest house, holiday flat license. So we're talking about the low-rise. These are holiday flats, and they get a license for guest houses. Para 17 makes me rather confused. There are some multi-story units, residential units in multi-story buildings that lease their flat or as short-term accommodation. That would be guest houses. You said you're going to simplify the license requirements. So for these holiday flats, do you have any definition? If people are renting their multi-story building units and they come under this category, then it would not be fair to the holiday flats. I don't think I can make sense of this paragraph, Mr. Chen. Well, as we said in the paper, we need to liaise with various departments and bureaus. And I would like to remove the red tape in order to assist the homestay lodging while not wanting to create any loopholes or gray areas. So in terms of the definition for homestay lodging, we like to be able to come up with the license, although the details have to be threshed out with various departments and bureaus. This is you. I'd like to clarify this. We have so many multi-story buildings, and the guest houses are normally located in the multi-story buildings, and they are regarded as guest houses, and they would be subject to the relevant requirements. Homestay lodging would be more like holiday flats. In Lychee World, in NT, you have this kind of accommodation. I hope that the legislation will be sufficiently clear. The other thing is, we know that there are 2 court cases. There are 2 vehicles for camping, the caravan or something. Would you have any definition in this regard? Because we're not sure whether the 2 vehicles, why is it the one was problematic and the other was not? Mr. Chen. Now, they need to get a license if they use it for residential purposes on a permanent basis. If the coach, for instance, if it is proved that it is used for permanent purposes as a guest house, they have to get a license. That much is clear. In these legislative amendments, we hope that the definitions for licensed guest houses would be clearer, and that would facilitate law enforcement. Now, for these coach guest houses, that they are on wheels. Both of them are on wheels. One of them is not a permanent residential premises. Why is it one of them is convicted, the other is not? Well, other than being on wheels, we have to consider the other facilities like the drainage, the air conditioning system. All these put together would determine whether the coach would be a permanent residential premises. Any further questions? Or any further questions? If not, right, I bring this to a close. The last item is any other business, any AOB item there. If not, meeting now adjourned. Thank you all very much.